Patrick, thank you for letting me be part of this first discussion. It is a provocative book, and I know, having written a provocation myself. I have found your work quite formative, actually. I reviewed Why Liberalism Failed in one of my first columns for the Washington Post, and the title of that column was Liberalism is Loneliness. And ostensibly, the column was not just about the problems of men and women, but it described and referenced your book in talking about how this regime of liberalism, this individualism, this every man or woman for himself, has in the end left us all alone, perhaps dependent on a state who is in fact not a mate or a partner, or dependent on a free market when the things that should have been ensured by our communities, our families, our romantic partners perhaps, have failed. In the end, liberalism leaves us entirely alone. And I was thinking about that as I wrote Rethinking Sex and talking to so many young men and women, and older men and women too, about the problem of loneliness, which was even more a problem, I think, than our current consent-based, overly liberal sexual regime. There is clearly felt, and I think any young person in this room has felt it, can talk about it with their friends, this sense of breakdown that men and women, as you mentioned, Daniel, don't know how to relate to each other. It's unclear what our roles are. It's unclear what is a man, what is a woman, what should we do, how do we interact, what are the norms that would shape our coming together. Without them, we stray, we move further away, we hide away. And when you talk about the difference between the many and the few, many researchers have noted this. The few, in fact, while promoting perhaps more liberal norms, norms that are suited to individuals with resources, indeed elites, who can experiment sexually, who don't need to have families or partners, they make enough money to support themselves, who can, in fact, make it on their own. Those are the people who actually end up living by norms, by the moral truths that were sometimes viewed as the property of the common person. But what's passed down tend to be, again, those trappings of individuation, these ideas that elites can suffer, but that the many will not thrive in following. I think when I think about what a mixed constitution looks like when it comes to gender, when it comes to the sexes, I think of an ideal of cooperation, of the cooperation that so many are searching for and longing for, in fact, that seems to be missing in this moment. Yes, norms supporting family formation, supporting healthy attachments, norms that suggest that, yes, you can grow something in the place that you're from. You don't have to leave and cross the country for opportunity and leave everything you love behind. There's also an understanding of roles, perhaps. And when we talk about roles, I think especially in progressive or more liberal spaces, which I tend to frequent, let's be honest, there's this idea that you'll be pushed into one. You have to fit one thing. There's no room for dissent, there's no room for personal discovery. But I would suggest, actually, that in a mixture of the many and the few, there's a view of and a vision for more opportunity, not less. There are more places that you can fit. You don't necessarily have to be a girl boss striving to succeed. You don't necessarily have to be a guy who's hyper-masculine and hyper-macho and hopped up on pornography to get girls on Tinder. There can be space for everyone and cooperation across both classes and genders. I do have one question, actually, like any good journalist, Professor. I worry a little bit when we talk about regime change and a new elite. Are we sure that we're not just replacing, again, the old elite, which is self-interested, with a new one that is self-interested in its own way? And then, of course, there's a question of sufferance. For all its faults, the liberal ideal is one that is actually very forgiving to people who are different, for people who maybe don't fit the norms and the mores of their locality, their town, of the assigned gender, we'll say, or at least what are understood to be the trappings of their gender. In the new regime, are people who differ just on sufferance, or are they actually included? Often when we talk about relationships between men and women, there is a focus on family formation. We want strong families with a patriarchal father and a mom who perhaps ideally works at home. They have kids. They do all of the normal things. What do we say to singles? What do we say to people who are gay, who are LGBT? What do we say for people who those norms don't quite fit? Where do they go in this new regime? I'm excited for the possibilities that you talk about in this book. Again, you might say that progressives would instantly push this away, but actually I think that there's a lot of room for agreement on questions of reforming the university so that the few come into contact with more people than just themselves, and increasingly arcane theories. These ideas of national service, say, teaching both men and women that they belong not just to themselves, but to their families and to their nations, to their communities, to others. And this idea of Pache, I think, the old conservatives, not drowning government in the bathtub, but actually getting it out of the bathtub and toweling it off and feeding it up with good vitamins so that it's fit for good use. I just want to make sure that these norms are corrigible, that they suit, yes, both men and women, but also all Americans.